everyone. I'm excited for our fourth and final workshop. Thank you all for being here. It's exciting. It's an exciting moment, but also a sad moment. I hope you all sign up again. We're going to have new speakers. You're going to be matched with a new mentor. We're going to have new content. I think you're going to really enjoy it. But our workshop 4 topic is how to manage conflict in the workplace. This is a very big deal. And I think to maybe ask an early question, just to get the ball rolling on this topic, is when you're in a work environment, the question I have for you is, how do you want others to feel about you? Write in the comment section. I love to learn about it, because what's so critical is the intentionality that we have about how others feel about us. I think so often when we're in a stressful work environment, we think about blaming other people. We think, well, XYZ person wants to sabotage me. They're always trying to undercut me or undermine my work, or they just do these things just to frustrate me. But more often than not, I find that they don't do it on purpose. More often than not, I find that they don't even know that what they're doing is frustrating you. And so what I really want to open up for in terms of this conversation, this question, is how do you want other people to feel about you? Because there might be something that you do that frustrates somebody else. You don't even realize that that's what you're doing, because you maybe haven't set an intentionality. It just was the most convenient for you to do thing for you to do at the time, so you just kept on doing it. You had no idea that this frustrated other people. So write in the comment section, how do you want other people to feel about you at work? Do you want other people to think of you as reliable or dependable or hardworking or kind, friendly, always optimistic, nice, always having a good, positive, upbeat personality? How do you want other people to perceive you? I'd love to learn about that, because ultimately, this is your reputation. This is how other people perceive you. And this is so critical, because I think it's so often, it's so easy to blame others for the things that they do that frustrate us, but it's so easy to be blind to how what we could do might frustrate them. So if we can set an intention for how we want other people to feel about us, if we think about that every single morning when we go into work, our likelihood of actually fulfilling and embodying that persona, that person, increases substantially. So I want to ask the question, how do you want other people to feel about you at work? Now, this is critical, because ultimately this means that you're going to have to remove any other personal baggage to make sure that you're still staying consistent with how you want other people to feel about you. It doesn't matter if you found out your grandma just got diagnosed with cancer, or that your dog just died, or that you're having rough things that are going on in your relationship. Does not matter, because at the end of the day, what matters is, are you able to stay consistent to who you said you wanted to be? And the person that is the most professional, the person that is really bringing it every single time, is the person that can stay the most consistent. Because if you start to let your personal stuff creep into your professional life, it's going to open you up to potentially not being the consistent person, the consistent intentionality that you've set for how you want other people to feel about you. And I think it's really important that you really work towards doing that, which leads to the 3 keys to success that I've shared with you in every workshop, which is your strategy, your story, and your state. And fortunately, we know how to get ourselves into a state conducive for being successful. No matter what is going on in our words, no matter how mad, sad, angry, dejected we're feeling about anything going on, we can get ourselves into an emotional state conducive for being happy, even if it's for a temporary period of time, through our motion. So what I want to do right now is I want you all to stand up, and I want you to shimmy it out. I want you to shake it loose. I want you to scream at the top of your lungs. On the count of 3, scream. 1, 2, 3. Yeah! Just let it out. Let it loose. Let it go. You've got nothing to lose. Who cares if other people are looking at you? You're probably in your house anyways. With all the coronavirus craziness going on, you're probably in quarantine. This is the time to let loose. Because here's the thing, what we know is that when you are able to do that, you're getting your blood moving, you're getting your blood flowing in your brain, you're releasing endorphins in your mind, you're getting yourself into a state conducive for being successful. So by doing that, you are putting yourself you're taking yourself from wherever you were, and you're putting yourself into a much more elevated status. That is how you stay consistent. No matter what you want other people to feel about you, if you can get yourself physically into a state conducive for being successful, other people are going to perceive you as whatever feeling you want to set for yourself. So that's critical. The other key is your story. What is the story you tell yourself for why you will or will not be successful? This is critical. If you tell yourself, well, I can't do that, or this is impossible, or I don't know if I have the abilities to do something like that, you're going to achieve the outcome that you've set for yourself. And that is ultimately going to lead to the outcomes that you put on yourself. So if you tell yourself why you're going to be successful, if you tell yourself why you're going to make it work, you might have a chance of actually going out and achieving the outcomes that you want to achieve. Now, the last key is your strategy. What are the things that you can do on a daily basis to get yourself there? So maybe if you think to yourself, how do I want other people to feel about me? Maybe if it's to be kind. What can you do that's really kind on a daily basis to really reinforce that feeling you want other people to feel about you? If you want other people to feel that you are hardworking or confident or reliable, what can you do on a daily basis that will embody, that will reinforce you being kind, hardworking, or confident, or reliable? What are those things that you can do to set yourself up for success? That is your strategy. Those are the things that you can do on a regular basis. Now, the reason why this all relates to conflict management in the workplace is because these intentions about how we want other people to feel about us is critical to what we actually manifest at work. Now, it's so easy to get into a rut. It's easy to get frustrated. It's easy for us to blame other people for our problems. But here is a great way. This workshop on conflict management is a great tool for you to leverage to help you overcome a lot of the issues that you've got and that you've essentially had for yourself at work. One of the biggest things that I'm a big believer, I'm a huge proponent of, is this concept called this concept called observation, feeling, need, request. This is the key to nonviolent communication, which you might think, I'm not getting violent in the workplace. That's okay. But what I've observed is that this is one of the best ways to totally diffuse a situation. Whether somebody gives you a snide comment at work that you just didn't appreciate, or somebody made an action that you felt like just didn't respect you, or your time, or your abilities, or that overall just frustrates you. As opposed to getting pissed off, yelling at them, exploding at them, being passive aggressive and talking shit about them behind their back, or anything that does not target the issue head on, any of those actions are not productive. Observation, feeling, need, request is productive and can help you come to a solution. Now, here's how observation, feeling, need, request works. It literally follows the exact formula that I've laid out. Observation. What is the thing that you have observed? Now, the key with observation is that it's got to be undeniable. It happened, but there's no emotion to it. So, for example, the thing that really frustrates you is when John interrupts you at work, and let's say he just interrupted you 3 times in the course of a conversation. You can say, hey, John, I was hoping that we could chat for a minute. John says, yeah, sure, what's going on? You say, hey, so one thing that I observed is that in the course of this conversation, you interrupted me 3 times. Now, you don't say, you were being a jerk, you were being a dick, you interrupted me and really threw me off. Like no feelings tied to it, just you interrupted me 3 times. I started talking about this, and then you cut me off and started talking about that. I started talking about this, you cut me off, started talking about that, and then I started talking about this, and you cut me off and started talking about that. It's the key is that it's undeniable. It happened. It's something that John can say, you know what? You're right, I did interrupt you 3 times. Now, doesn't matter what his excuses were for interrupting you. The next part is the feeling. Now, the feeling is how do you actually feel about that? You're not here to call out John and call him out for being a jerk. You're here to say, hey, when I am interrupted, I feel belittled. I feel disrespected. And now this is the big part, your need. Now, don't elaborate, by the way, when I say those feelings, don't elaborate on them. Just say, hey, I felt belittled. I feel belittled and disrespected. That's it. Everyone can relate to the feelings of being belittled and disrespected. Now, your need is critical because your need is like a higher level need that you've got that you believe the world should work like this. In a work environment, the work environment should work this way and that everybody can agree to that. And so your need is, you know what, hey, my need is that I work in a work environment where I feel like when I'm speaking that I'm being respected and that I'm at least being heard. And now that's critical. If you put that out there, John can probably agree to that. The last part is request. Now, what is a request that you can make to John so then he can start to take action that ultimately it can formulate change? Now, you don't want to make it something that's concrete. You don't want to say, hey, my request is that you never interrupt me again. Unrealistic. Probably not going to happen. John may interrupt you sometime in the future, especially if he's weaning off this because it was a habit. But if your request is, hey, my request is that when I'm speaking, that you're conscious of what I'm saying and that you try your best to refrain from interrupting me when I'm speaking. That's a very fair and valid request. John can probably agree to that because you're not asking for too much. You're just asking for him to be conscious of it. So that is how observation, feeling, need request works. It ultimately just lays out exactly what the thing that happened was, how you felt about it, without calling out John or calling out the other person or talking about how bad of a person they were. Sharing what your need is and your request for how they can implement that for the future. That is critical. Now, we're going to talk a lot about this later on tonight in this workshop with our guest speaker. Our guest speaker is an expert on conflict management in the workplace. I think you're going to really enjoy what our guest has to say. But those are my personal observations about what I've observed to work in observation in terms of conflict management. The last thing that I want to share before we jump into our guest speaker is this importance of teaching somebody else something that you've learned. One of the things that I've observed is that when people go through this workshop, when people go through this program, 20 is the magic number. If you tell 20 or more people about something you learned in this program, by the way, it doesn't necessarily need to be that you taught them a full seminar. It could be that you mentioned to your significant other or a friend, a peer, a colleague, hey, I learned about this thing called observation, feeling, need, request in Ambition and Motion Workshop. That could be it. We know that when people tell 20 or more people about something they learned, anything they learned in this program, their likelihood of achieving their professional goals increases exponentially. And the reason why is because teaching something to somebody else reinforces that information in their mind. And so by doing that, by telling 20 or more people, the likelihood that this is going to stick, the likelihood that you are going to apply it in your professional environment, and the likelihood that you're going to achieve the professional goals that you've set for yourself, because that's been such a big focus of this program, increases exponentially. So what I would love for you to do after this workshop is to find somebody that you can teach something that you learned from this workshop this evening. I think that will really help reinforce what you're learning in this program, really help you make the most out of this experience. I'm so excited to dive into our guest speaker this evening. I really hope that, and I really encourage you to participate in the program. You're going to get a new mentor. We're going to have new content. We're going to have new speakers. I think you're really going to enjoy it. This has been a pleasure working with you all, and I look forward to the next steps.
Everybody, welcome to our workshop today. We are here to talk about how to manage conflict in the workplace. So you might be entering into a work environment and maybe you've got an interesting relationship with your boss. Maybe you've got an interesting relationship with a coworker. Maybe someone has done something that is a little passive aggressive. Maybe they started an email per my previous email, which is always a great passive aggressive way to start an email. I'm being facetious. You should never start an email per my anything ever, because that's the worst. But we may encounter ourselves with that situation. And fortunately for us, we've got a great guest speaker with us here today. Guest for us with here today. We got Chris Janzen. Chris, thanks for being here.
Great to be here. Thanks for letting me join in, Garrett.
So Chris, if you could, just to give our audience a little context, could you share with them who you are, what you do, how you got to where you're at today?
Yeah, I'm Chris Janzen. I'm Vice President of Product Design. And so my background is creating digital learning solutions. I've worked in higher ed, I've worked in healthcare, and most recently in K through 12.
Very cool. So let's talk about topic for today, conflict, managing conflict. I guess, have you ever had a scenario where you had a frustrating coworker or teammate? How did you handle it? What did you learn? Have you ever made a mistake in the process of handling conflict? And have you ever felt like, oh wow, I handled that pretty good?
Yes, and I've also learned along the way as I've grown in my career. So yeah, one scenario jumped to mind as you're teeing that up. We were designing a training solution that had both software and content for our first kind of blue chip client in this organization that I was at a few years ago. And we just didn't have a whole lot of maturity. We didn't have a whole lot of practice in doing this. This was our first client. We had a bunch of eyes on us. We had stakeholders that we were trying to manage that hadn't been through a development cycle like this before. So there was a lot of newness. And with that newness, can come conflict and people not aligned on what the priorities are, how things are going to work out. And ultimately what ended up happening was our estimates were off. We had estimated it was going to cost this much to develop and design it, and it cost more than that. And we didn't realize it until about halfway through, when we really understood the scope of what the client wanted. And so that's
Wait,
a
are you trying to tell me a technology project that was off of the budget and the projected timeline? Oh my gosh, I've never heard of that. I'm just
Yeah, it's
teasing.
happened in my life. Yes, it has happened to me, not just once, but this particular time, there was some really challenging personalities, and that made it much more difficult than if everybody was just focused on figuring out how to solve the problem. There was some dynamics there that just made it tough to get aligned.
Challenging personalities. Were they both up and down? And by that, I mean, were they both like people that you reported to and people that reported to you? Or was it just one way or the other?
Yeah, it was all over the board, right? It was
Okay.
peers, it was stakeholders, and then specific team members too. And so it seemed like, um, there was enough swirl that was created around that just made it really hard to get laser focused on figuring out a solution.
I like that. Okay, cool. So let's talk about the differences because I think one thing maybe our audience isn't fully comprehending is the concept of like when they get their own direct reports, like how should they treat them from a conflict perspective versus when you're reporting to a boss, should you treat them from a conflict perspective? Because it's different. It just naturally is. Like objectivity reduces the higher anyone goes up in any organizational hierarchy. We're not trying to get fired over here, but some things need to get changed. And if our boss needs to hear something that maybe they don't want to hear, how do you go about communicating that? So what have you found to be effective for communicating to, let's start with a boss. How do you go about communicating to the higher ups like, hey, we need to adjust our perspective here?
As much as I can, it's aligning on the problem of, okay, in this case, it was we're off on our estimate. So that's the problem we need to solve for. Are we going to cut scope? Are we going to increase our budget? Some mix of that. And how are we going to go about it? And then getting some alignment on that, then you can focus on some of the people challenges. But if you're only focused on the people challenges, you're not going to resolve the root cause of where that tension or that conflict has come about.
What you're really highlighting, and what I really love about what you're saying right now, is the power of properly setting expectations. Because those expectations are so critical, especially when reporting to a boss or communicating with a boss. Like, if your boss expects this and you're just not on pace to hit this, whether you're up or down, doesn't really matter. As I love what you're sharing about just like as quickly as you can realigning perspectives and expectations, because nothing is more irritating to a boss than to think something's going to be here at certain time period and to find out that you're not even close to it and that you knew you wouldn't have been close to it weeks ago.
Well, and you're absolutely right. And if you don't set that expectation or realign those expectations along the way, because things change, you joked around about a project going awry. I mean, it wouldn't be fun and exciting if we knew how to do everything. And so that's the exciting point, is doing something new. And just inevitably, by doing something new, you're going to run into a new challenge that you couldn't anticipate. And it's how you deal with it that's really that realigning of expectations. And if you focus on the personalities or people wanting to do things a different way or those types of things, it's really easy for it to be finger pointing. And so me going to my boss and complaining about the way somebody works or someone's personality, is just pointing the finger at somebody else, when we really want to, make sure that we're setting expectations in a way that my boss is going to be successful and therefore I'm going to be successful.
Yeah, no, I love it. Gossip sucks and it's toxic to the workplace.
Absolutely.
And it's
Absolutely.
so easy to fall into that trap. And I think I want to be clear when I say it's so easy to fall in the trap, I mean, it's easy to think that you're just venting, but you got to know your audience. Like, who are you venting to? Is it someone that's your spouse who's not working at the company so you can vent and that's okay? Totally cool. Is it someone who's at the company? Not cool. I don't care how close you are to that person. This is a no vent zone. And I know you might think, well, venting's therapeutic. It helps me get my feelings off my chest. If you are venting about someone else and their performance, it is detrimental to the culture of the company. It's toxic and you're the cause of it. Even if you're frustrated at the other person, if you're not approaching them directly to have that conversation, you are creating an environment that's going to come to bite you back in the butt.
Yeah, and so as a leader, when someone's venting, when one of your employees, team members is, or it doesn't even have to be on your team members, but when somebody's venting to you as a leader in the organization, then you got to make a tough call. What do you do about it? How do you coach and mentor that person? Step one, and then step two, if there's, some sort of crossing the line type of things that are being vented about, like how do you address those as a leader so that it doesn't create that noise and swirl and just end up being a toxic culture?
Yeah. I mean, and on the flip side, if you've got a team member, direct report, peer, whomever, that you also share some frustrations with, and someone comes to vent to you about it, it is so easy to be like, yeah, no, they also frustrate me when they do this or that or whatever. And if you do that, you are now complicit in the action. You're complicit in the activity because now you've created a common bond of venting, and that is unhealthy because that person needs to stand their fair date in court and trial. I mean, not like literal trial, but I'm just saying, like, if you've got something that's frustrating you that this person does, you got to approach them about it. If they have no idea, you can't expect them to change their behavior. And if they find out through the grapevine that you've been talking negatively about them behind their back and venting, that is either going to lead to more venting from them about you or them not feeling welcome at the workplace. And that's not a good situation either.
100%, exactly.
So, we talked about managing up. How about managing down or to other colleagues or peers or team members when just it comes to handling conflict? Like maybe you've got a team member and they've been doing one way of work for XYZ number of years, and now you're saying, hey, we need to change the way that we work. And they're saying, whoa, 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 whoa. I've been doing this for 20 something years. I'm not changing how I'm doing it. How do you handle that? How do you go about getting the behavior change that you need from your team members that are reporting to you?
Yeah, I think any good leader knows the individuals on their teams. Maybe you're a new leader. You still got to put the time and effort to get to know those team members. So when you do run into these scenarios, you kind of know where somebody's at on that spectrum of very adaptable in a changing environment to more set in their ways and likes to do things the way they want to do things. And where are your team members on that spectrum? So that you can kind of meet them where they're at. And you have to start with the why. You have to start with the why this is important to us as an organization, us as a team, the benefits of, the why we're making this change and why we think this is the right thing to do. And you have to start there to get somebody on board to know that it's not, you don't want to change just for change's sake. You want the real rationale there and to have a true conversation about it and let those team members, no matter where they're at in the spectrum, voice their opinion because maybe they're seeing something from their where they sit in the organization, what they do that could have a positive influence on how successful this change could be.
No, I like that.
It's not overreacting to someone's maybe perceived unwillingness to change. It's more of a, oh, I understand how that person thinks a little bit and why they're passionate about this thing and let them voice their perspective.
I want to ask the audience a question real quick. Post in the comments section, how have you handled conflict? Whether it be with a coworker or a friend or a family member, whomever, I don't really care the circumstance. How did you handle it? What did you do? Post in the comment section. I'd love to learn more. You know, Chris, you are bringing up this really great point about one, understanding your people, but two, and I'm implicitly taking this, but I think there's power in just communicating, whether it be your non-negotiables or the things that are really irritating you, or the things that are just like, hey, we can't keep doing this moving forward. Because for a lot of companies, like I've seen people quit because they just assumed, oh, my company would never be willing to adapt to me and my needs in this time period. And you know, you go to the flip side, you interview that boss, that leader, that senior level leader who controls the strings on these sorts of things. If you're to say, hey, you've got a team member who's been with you for the last 5 years, does great work, but because of a certain personal circumstance, they are now going to need some special accommodation. Would you be willing to accommodate to keep this person around? Not all the time, but very often those leaders would be like, oh my gosh, this person's amazing. Of course I would. Like, sure, there's some people that are kind of like teetering. They're not amazing. They're not horrible either. You know, if they were to do something wrong, you're like, all right, well, don't let the door hit you on the way out. But you know, there's a lot of people where if they do great work, you would do whatever it takes to keep them, and vice versa. As an employer, as a boss, if you hear from, or rather on the flip side, if an employee is doing something that is irritating or not effective or whatever, like that employee would much rather you tell them that what they're doing is not right and that needs to be fixed versus you just firing them carte blanche and then just saying, you know, toodaloo, we're going to hire someone else to, you know, try to do this. Like, I think at the end of the day, if we could communicate our irritations, our frustrations, our non-negotiables, the things that are just on our chest weighing on us and we're not able to push through that barrier. We'd much rather have that awkward, maybe hard conversation versus the alternative of just severing the relationship altogether. So, what are some, you know, we're going to go into the best practices, but I love to go into mistakes. I think mistakes are really fun to learn through because one, it shows that you're human, but two, it allows us to understand your rationale and why we might also potentially go down that path and how we can maybe avoid it. So, what are mistakes you made in the process of handling conflict at work?
No, I think it's some of the things we've already discussed not doing, which is complaining, venting, you know, to the wrong person at the wrong time. And you know, I think in a certain situation that I have on top of my mind, it was I thought I was in a safe spot. I thought I was venting to, you know, somebody that I worked with, but I was just exasperating the problem, as we said, and it didn't do me any good, you know, at the end of the day. I didn't do anybody any favors. It didn't progress things. It didn't make my life easier. So yeah, it's as you said, Garrett, you get complicit. You fall into that trap. And I've done it. And you know, there was no benefit at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I've done it too. So I was gonna say we
Yeah.
acknowledge it because it's so easy and
So
easy to fall into. We're not these patron saints here that don't make any mistakes. Easy to fall into this realm of, you know, what they say, misery loves company. Like, it's really easy to fall into that. But if we do, we should be conscientiously aware that if we do, we are creating a toxic environment. And if we have another team member coming up to us to complain, then we need to stop it in its tracks. It's our responsibility. It's not just don't. It's like if you say I didn't go along with it, but I also didn't openly not go along with it either. You're complicit. It's essentially an omission from behavior and action. And as professionals, we need to say, hey, I'm not comfortable with this sort of session right here. We need to reevaluate and discuss like what are next steps forward, and not just judge this person for our perceived slight that they did. Speaking of which, how do you handle understanding intentionality versus perception? And by that, I just mean like how often, when you discover someone's doing something that's frustrating you, are they intentionally doing that to just sabotage your workday and frustrate you? Or is there oftentimes a subtle reason that was not under your awareness that they were doing it this way, but they had no idea that it was impacting you the way it was?
Yeah, I'd say I'd try to have a optimistic mind when it comes to that, and err on the latter, thinking that somebody probably doesn't understand how it impacts me or impacts the project or whatever it is. And so again, just trying to get to that understanding with that individual. Um, did they realize it? Why are they doing it the way that they're doing? And so most of the times it's pretty simple. I would say trying to understand the perception of somebody actually going to the extent of sabotaging you. I don't think I've never been in a scenario where I proved that out, nor would I want to. I mean, that would be a lot of effort to, I don't know what extent, what you would get out of it. But yes, I think we're all human, and you can be in a grumpy mood and think that somebody's doing something intentionally, but then just, take a deep breath and think about why somebody would go to that extent, flip that attitude around for yourself, be positive, be optimistic, and work together. Be a true team player, figure out what it is. Maybe they're doing it for really good reasons, and you have to live with it. And you're the one that needs to change.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's exactly it. I bring it up, and I know it may sound super silly to say that, but how often I get, brother, let's put it this way. I hear all the time from people when they're venting to me about some coworker or colleague that they're frustrated with. And they'll say, oh, well, this person just does it because they know it irritates me. And I'm like, I highly doubt that.
Right.
I think about like the pranks in the office between Jim and Dwight. That doesn't really happen. Like no one's sitting there every single day adding a nickel to the phone of some other colleague and then one day taking all the nickels out so when the person answers the phone it smacks them in the face. No one's got time for that. Like no no one's got the time to elaborately prank or sabotage someone else's day. What we often just don't realize is what are their incentives and what are the constraints they are facing. And more often than not, it's so easy to judge ourselves on our intentions versus others on our perceptions. It's like if we go into an office, someone shows up 15 minutes late for work, our perception, that lazy sack of trash. What are they doing? How could they get here 15 minutes late? But if I'm 15 minutes late, well, oh, my dog vomited. I had to take my kids
Right.
to school. There was a major car crash on the highway. There's all these things going on in my life. It's justified why I was late for work. But someone else, they're lazy and they can't set an alarm clock. It's the empathy to understand that other people are going through things and the curiosity to actually be inquisitive about why they might be doing things the way that they're doing.
Yeah, it's both of those. The empathy is one thing, as a designer, you have to empathize with your users. You're designing a solution for a user. And that's something I've been practicing my whole career. It's actually a really great skill as a leader, as a team member, as an employee. And so yeah, you're 100% right, Garrett. It's having that empathy. And if you have the curiosity on top of that, it actually makes it more fun because then you enjoy getting to know these different personalities and what makes somebody tick and what makes somebody, you know, giving back to that person and helping them be excited about the way that they do things and, the way that they finish their job and the way that they work.
Yeah, I love it. Let me ask the students a question real quick. Post in the comments section. What do you do to practice curiosity when you're in moments of conflict? Post in the comments section. I'd love to learn more. I think one other thing to add when it comes to the curiosity is how you ask that question and practice curiosity, because there's a very, very big difference between saying, why would you do that? Versus, out of curiosity, I'm noticing that you're doing this way. Why are you doing it like that? This is a very different question in the vocal intonation, body language, and the way that you phrase something. Because why would you do that is very aggressive and immediately puts people on their heels in the defensive. Whereas if you, are a little softer, a little gentler, a little more speaking in a way that conveys, hey, I'm not judging you one way or the other. I'd just be genuinely curious to know why are you doing it this way. That makes people less defensive and more just like, I don't know, I just felt like I was doing this, seemed to be the most convenient way for me to do this.
And we have all these different communication methods, mediums. We have email and the chats and all these different types of communications. We have meetings like this where we're meeting virtually or in person. And so we've all received those emails or messages that took us back like, whoa, I didn't realize I offended this person or something. And that could have just been a miscommunication right there, just because the tone was read wrong. So yeah, taking into account the method that the communication is delivered, and the tone for that specific medium is critical.
Yeah, no, it makes me think of that Key and Peele skit. If anybody watches the comedic duo Key and Peele, but they've got a hilarious back and forth where they're meeting up for like to get a beer later in the day for happy hour or whatever. And one of them is interpreting it in the most negative possible way possible, and the other one's interpreting it as like, I'm pretty, I'm flexible. Whatever you want to do, I'm good. And the other guy's like, whatever. Do we do whatever we want? Are we even meeting or are we not meeting? And so the point is it can be perceived so differently. One thing I know that if I'm having to deliver something difficult, I will either try to call them, or a lot of chat features now have like a voice feature functionality where you can like press and record a voice message to send it. And I know it might take a little extra time both for you to send it and for them to listen to it, but I really think for them to hear the inflection in your voice and the way that you're asking a question, it can really pay a ton of dividends in terms of it landing the way you want it to land. So, Chris, is there ever a time to avoid conflict? Like, is there ever a scenario where, you just say, screw it, I don't even want to deal with this?
Yeah, I'm sure there is. There's probably some reasons to let somebody else deal with the conflict. And I mean, it could really be like, hey, somebody else has to, part of their job is to bring some resolution to some conflict that happened. Maybe you were just a witness to it. So yeah, there's probably times when you want to make sure the right people are dealing with the conflict. And sometimes it's you, sometimes it isn't. I think, understanding how critical or how substantial that conflict is it something that, if left untreated, is going to fester? Or is it something that, if there's a theme or a pattern, I think you definitely have to hit it head on and figure out how to get some resolution around it. But if it's small and variable, there are opportunities just to avoid it and redirect and focus on the work at hand.
Yeah. Let's talk about perspective and self-awareness for a second. Who are your mentors? How do they help you manage conflict? How do you go about exiting those conversations with your mentors, with those people who, whether we start out venting or we're just trying to figure out how we're processing our feelings about a situation? How do you go about doing that? And how do you go about having this self-awareness and introspection to like interpret the situation for what it is and where you went wrong?
Yeah, I mean, I've been very fortunate to have some great mentors, and you develop a personal relationship with mentors, or at least I've been fortunate to be able to do that. So I can think of a few different mentors as you bring up that question. And when you really value and trust that mentor and have that personal connection, they can read you really well. You're obviously going to them for some expertise that they have. They've maybe been there, done that type of thing, and you're working your way throughout your career. And so then they can spot things super quick. And that can be a little, alarming, like, oh, I didn't really, but when you have that trust and that personal relationship, it can just speed things up. It can make things, I've had mentors that are maybe 3 steps ahead of me, 10 steps ahead of me. And so, I'm just trying to catch up. And then, you reflect on it and you go, oh, okay, next time I talk to that person, I'm going to think about the questions they asked me last time we connected, so I can be a few more steps ahead and try to meet them where they're at. And it's kind of a fun game. Like, can you think of the questions, your mentor is going to ask you, and can you answer them before you tee up a scenario?
I love that. It makes me think about like resumes. You are your own worst judge of your own resume, but all your friends, your peers, those that you consider most close to you, they're the best judge of your resume because they know you. They can see the
Right.
job description. They're like, you don't need to make this on 5-point font and get rid of all your borders because all these other experiences that you're putting on here are not relevant whatsoever to the job description. They don't need to have a book to understand whether or not you're relevant or not relevant. There are three core experiences that you have that relate to this job posting. Those are the only three things that should be on there. Make it easy to read. Get rid of all the other superfluous stuff. But I think it goes with that self-awareness as to, how you're handling a circumstance. Because when you have someone that can almost take you back and be like, hey, man, you're having a really defensive reaction to this. And I don't think it's serving you in this situation. I don't fully understand why the person you're frustrated at did anything wrong. And sometimes you hear that and you're like, oh, what? All right, let me reevaluate what's going on here. Oh gosh, darn it. There was a classic mix up and I got irritated, but now I realize that they had no understanding why I would be irritated because they had no idea of any of the data or insights or information as to what I'm going through. And yeah, to have someone identify that is really critical. So I guess students, post in the comment section, who are your mentors? Who do you go to when you have conflict? I'd be curious to know who are those people in your life that you feel comfortable going to just help you process the challenge that you're facing, whether it be work, friends, family, whomever. Post in the comment section. I'd love to learn more about it. So Chris, this has been a really good workshop just on like having healthy conflict at work and just being able to manage conflict in general. Are there any final tips or suggestions that you got for our audience as they embark their careers and work towards the outcomes that they hope to achieve professionally, but also invariably handle conflict that comes naturally with any elements of growth?
Well, this one's probably a pretty corny one, but growing up with a few different brothers, I was in the middle, I had an older one and a younger one. And so we would play some sports and it would escalate into some kind of fight, some kind of battle, something. And my mom would always say, count to 10 and walk away. And that is a pretty corny thing. But I think sometimes you do just need a few moments to reflect and take it, take those moments, walk to the bathroom, whatever you need to do to get yourself kind of out of the screen or out of that certain high conflict scenario and just do some reflection and take a few moments.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's great. And you know what? This might be controversial. I am a fan of sleeping on it and going to bed and sleeping. Some people say, oh, never go to bed angry. Hogwash. I go to bed angry, not all the time, but sometimes. And I wake up the next morning and I'm like, I've got some perspective on this situation. I recognize I was probably a little overreacting when XYZ happened. And now that I've had some time to sleep on it, I can recognize that I didn't act the way I would have liked to have acted in that circumstance. So I'm not, yeah, anyone who says don't go to bed angry, phooey. Rest on it, gets a good night's sleep, come back the next day, and likely hopefully you will have some perspective. I know I certainly get perspective after sleeping on it, and it certainly helps me.
Yeah, and maybe a couple other things. One, if you're going to respond to an email or some sort of message, and you think it might just escalate the conflict even more, draft it, sleep on it, or draft it and show it to somebody else before sending it. And usually, you wake up the next morning and go, "Oh, yeah, I didn't want to say these things." And then, if you're working in a remote scenario, or even if you are in person, instead of sending that email, pick up the phone and call, or go to that person's office or desk and talk to them face to face. Because like you said, Garrett, that tone is such a critical thing, and how you communicate, is going to be much better received if the person really truly understands that you're coming from a place of empathy and curiosity.
Yeah, no, so true. Great points. Empathy and curiosity. If you take anything away from that, that's it. Well, Students, thank you all for being here for this workshop. This was a great workshop. Chris, thank you for your time. Have a wonderful rest of your evening. I hope to see you all next semester in the mentor program.